Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Today we are on the road at the UVM Fleming Museum of Art, and we'll be traveling back in time to an era that was fun, festive, and full of all kinds of colorful characters. We'll also be exploring an array of animal-related objects. It's an exhibition that was put together in part by UVM students. But first, Afghanistan. During more than 40 years of war in that country, Afghan rug weavers have documented history through their expressive artistic tradition. We'll see and learn what's on display. And so joining me to follow that is museum curator Andrea Rosen. It's so good to see you, and thank you for hosting us.
Always a pleasure.
So we're starting with the exhibition that surrounds us right now this afternoon, and it's called War Rugs of Afghanistan. So give us an overview of what this is about.
Yes, so since 1979, when Soviets invaded Afghanistan, traditional Afghan rug weavers started to incorporate imagery of weapons, tanks, helicopters, and other images that reflected their experience of a war-torn country. And the conflicts have gone through several evolutions, as has the genre of war rugs. But this is a genre that then has been sort of celebrated in a way, or Western consumers and art lovers have found them really intriguing for their juxtaposition of traditional and war-related imagery. And so you've started to see them pop up in collections, in museum exhibitions like ours. So our show is all from one man's collection, Kevin Sudaith. He'll speak later this semester, but he is a collector of war rugs and seller of war rugs. And then this exhibition was first put together by the Gund Gallery at Kenyon College and then traveled here to the Fleming.
So war rugs, I mean, Afghanistan is very famous for its rugs over millennia almost. But so what percentage of rugs? Is this what everybody's doing now?
It's a small percentage. I've seen, sort of single digits in terms of the overall, what we call Oriental rug market, but it is sort of comes from a similar place in terms of being driven by the Western market.
Yeah, very interesting. And there even are the World Trade Centers are some of the imagery besides the tanks and the missiles and other instruments of war.
Yeah, it's a powerful set. We have 3 of these rugs featuring the World Trade Center in the exhibition, and I know it's powerful. I know I was really struck by them when I first saw them. It's actually, the imagery derives from propaganda pamphlets that were dropped in Afghanistan by US forces. It's really complicated.
So it is complicated. Would you say that these rugs that feature all these weapons of war are glorifying war, or are they anti-war?
It's hard to answer that question. I think ultimately these weavers want to make a living. They want to live their lives and protect their families like anyone. So again, I think they make them because they sell. I think, it varies. Certainly, there are some images that celebrate the exodus of Soviet troops in 1989. So they're certainly celebrating the defeat and celebrating the Mujahideen fighters who helped facilitate that defeat. There are portraits that show, historical Afghan figures who they consider heroes of the wars they've been through. And then a lot of the imagery is definitely meant to appeal to the American troops who are there in that country. And so definitely sort of, they're, liberated from the war on terror by American troops. So definitely celebrating U.S. intervention because that's who their market is.
Right. And it's certainly what's happening in their country. It's a country at war. So most of these rugs were woven by women, which I think maybe is traditional or maybe not. And,
it is.
Why, and is that significant? What about who's making these rugs?
Yeah, that's another complicated aspect of this genre, which is it can be very difficult to get the perspectives of the weavers themselves. It's a very sort of layered market where there will be the dealers who sell these rugs are primarily men. There might be many sort of layers of middlemen transporting the rugs from the weavers to the dealers. It's very hard to actually get the voices and perspectives of the weavers themselves, particularly the women weavers who might be sort of it might be in much more rural parts of the country. It might be sort of sequestered in a way. But then, in refugee camps where many Afghans have moved in throughout the conflicts, more men have taken up the practice.
Right. These are in Pakistan and Iran, and more men are doing it because this is a way to make a living?
Exactly. It's one of the few forms of work available to them when they're restricted to these camps.
So availability of textiles and colors, do you have a sense of that? I mean, this is a country in war.
Traditionally, Afghan rugs have always been sheep's wool. Cotton and silk weren't very available to them, and I think it's still the case that they're primarily, well, you might see some silk and cotton embellishments. You see a variety of techniques from like a flat weave to most of them are pile. They're these knotted things, so it gets that cushy feeling that a carpet you think of having. And I think, there's, more traditionally these would be vegetable-based dyes. I think now more synthetic dyes are available. So
yeah, some of them are much brighter than you might think.
Right.
These certainly have been shown and exhibited here. So how did the University of Vermont get this exhibit, and what was involved there?
Yeah, we were looking for, a traveling exhibition, one that might be organized by another institution, take a little bit of work off my plate. So we were talking with the folks at the Gun Gallery at Kenyon, and who were offering a number of exhibitions for travel, and this was the one that jumped out as a great opportunity for us because the Fleming is one of the few globally focused museums in the state, and this sort of distinct mix of a traditional medium with a contemporary spin, I think, is always a really fascinating combination for folks. And then the fact that we are a museum within a university that can propose these really complicated questions of this genre that is difficult to deal with, it felt like we are potentially a good venue for that.
Right, and it certainly is bringing up a lot of discussion, and you have a discussion board, and because they are so interesting and intriguing. I just want to make sure that we also talk about some of the other exhibits that you have for this spring. We're going to shift gears to a very different kind of show, which is Wood Gaylor, who you have been studying for years and years.
Yes.
So tell us about that terrific and fun exhibit.
Thank you. Yes, I've been researching Wood Gaylor for 4 years. This is a now very little known artist, but he was very active in the New York art world in the 19-teens, 20s, and 30s. He kind of knew all the famous artists in New York at that time, and was very active in these artist groups that would put on these wacky costume balls with skits and props and clown costumes, and Gaylor depicted them in his paintings, which are very brightly colored, very festive, as you said. So depicting this side of the art world that isn't maybe talked about as much in the scholarship, this kind of fun-loving side.
Right, and so it was the Penguin Group is one of the things that it was called.
Yep.
These are very bright paintings. They're really fun. But talk about his style, because it's very folk arty. It's very flat. But he wasn't a folk artist. He wasn't naive. He was doing this very intentionally.
Yes. Yeah, and that's been a fun thing for me to pull apart. He had some artistic training. He took some classes at the National Academy of Design, and he had some art teachers. He actually was never a full-time artist. He had a full-time job as a dress pattern designer, but he was pretty prolific given it wasn't his full-time job. And yeah, he seems to have chosen, despite his training, to create the very flattened sense of space, very flattened figures with these distinct outlines. I think he loved to draw. I think he was more of a drawer than a painter, and that's why so many of his paintings are really focused on the outlines of figures and then filled in with these very solid blocks of color. And the folk art is a really great reference, because Gaylor was part of this group of artists in Ogunquit, Maine, who were some of the first collectors of the objects that would come to be categorized as American folk art. So this is also the moment when folk art is codified as a genre, and he and his friends are playing a role in that and simultaneously being inspired by the folk art they're collecting.
And it influences modern art,
yes,
which was born during that time.
Exactly.
Really fascinating. Anything more you want to say just about the color, or what you hope people take away from that show?
I think people will enjoy it.
Fun.
It is really
You had
fun.
a ball.
Yes, yes, and I think that that you can really get into the paintings. You could spend a ton of time finding all these little details. But what's really fun for me in the scholarship of it is often those details are borne out by archival photographs of them in their costumes with their props and things like that. So you can kind of follow the thread where certain props pop up in different paintings. And if anyone wants to know more, they can get our book. I wrote an exhibition catalog to go with the show.
Beautiful.
That features my research. So it's really exciting for me. And the show will travel to 2 other museums.
Fantastic. And in Algonquin,
Yes.
for one. And so Animal Transformations, also student curated.
Yes.
A quick note about that.
Sure. So that's upstairs off our European American Gallery. All objects from the collection featuring animal materials that humans have transformed in some way, sometimes to take advantage of the material properties, but also sort of the metaphorical properties of the animal that they're also adopting into the object. And the students in the museum anthropology class that curated that show did a really great job taking that theme and running with it. It's a beautiful installation.
Right, and it's objects and some paintings. It's
Costumes,
a wonderful
taxidermied peacock.
Yeah. Right. Okay, thank you, Andrea Rosen. Thank you so much, curator of the Fleming Museum. There are wonderful shows here on exhibit, and the 2020 spring exhibitions at the Fleming Museum run until May 8th. Check the Fleming's Museum website on your screen for hours of admission and learn about activities and educational events happening at the museum this spring. Thank you so much. It's so intellectual. I endeavor to ask everyone to come to the Fleming Museum to see these great shows.
Thanks, Fran.
Thank you, Andrea. And thank you for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard.